If this is what it looks like when they have to make quick changes, it's a little bit of a concern, and especially in that midfield. All of these similar issues. We still did not see a huge amount of connectivity, still did not see that fluid play, that possessive play, being able to break lines. They struggled to break Costa Rica's low block. And so it just sort of exacerbated the issues that not only does the U.S. have, but I just don't think they have time to solve. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special YouTube edition of The Late Sub. You know, we had to do it. The U.S. played a second friendly this week, and we need to discuss it because it was the final game before the United States goes off to France to play their first group stage game against Zambia. That is happening today. It is Wednesday, July 17th. It is happening in 8 days. The U.S. will begin their Olympic campaign. They had a send-off series game against Costa Rica yesterday, and the results were somewhat middling, so we need to jump in. We need to talk about some of the things that we like, some of the things that we are worried about going into what is truly a kind of a crucial Olympics. And I found not only the performances, but also the response to the performances from both players and coaches alike to be really interesting. I found not only the play to be very interesting, but also just sort of the response, some of the things we heard from players, some of the things we heard from head coach Emma Hayes going into this period, which I think gives us a glimpse into perhaps how internally the team would like fans to approach this Olympics. So long story short, the U.S. tied Costa Rica to a scoreless draw on another very hot, muggy, difficult game in Washington, D.C. The pitch was not at its best at Audi Field, as much as we love Audi Field. There were a lot of external factors that maybe led to this one being a little bit less exciting than fans had hoped. But obviously with the United States, and certainly with this new look United States that fans would like to see take a step forward from the 2023 World Cup, perhaps some warning flags, some issues in the attack that concern people. So we're going to start with the starting lineup. We're going to talk about what changes were made and what changes were not made. So this was a very, very similar starting group to the team that started against Mexico last Saturday. That, to me, all of this stuff, I'm always editorializing, right? But from the outside, what that reads to me as Emma Hayes, with the limited time that she has with this team prior to the Olympics, has decided that not only is the time for experimentation over, obviously, but just she wants to see the group that she believes would be, for example, like I said, starting in a medal match to get the time together that they need in game. Does that affect subbing patterns? Absolutely. Does that affect probably depth when they need to rotate in the group stage? Yes. There's positive and negatives to that. I like that it's clear, but it also does just, again, indicate, and Hayes brought this up after the match, the limitations of a group that are only in the fourth game under their current manager. So let's talk about this starting 11. We started Alyssa Nair in goal, Crystal Dunn, Tierna Davidson, Naomi Girma, Emily Fox, Sam Coffey. Was supposed to be Rose Lavelle, and we'll return to that in a second, Lindsay Horan, and then in the attack, Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, and Mallory Swanson. So it was supposed to only be one change, which was swapping in Crystal Dunn for Jenna Neiswanger in the defense. And what was said about that switch was just that it was load management, that Neiswanger just needed a rest. Same group, intending probably to do very similar things, not, again, doing kind of that hyper-conservative midfield. I think they were going to push. I think they anticipated that Costa Rica was going to go into more of a low block, which is exactly what they did. But there was one late scratch that highlighted, I think, something that could become a concern in the Olympics. Not only because it certainly is concerning that Rose Lavelle had to scratch this last minute. They said it was just after warmups. She felt some tightness. It just wasn't worth it. I think all of that is true. I think with a player like Rose Lavelle, who has sometimes struggled to stay fit, especially around major tournaments, always a concern when she has to step out. Hopefully it is truly just nothing and it's not that big a deal and she'll be all good to go and it's just mostly precautionary. But then when Lavelle was pulled out of this game, they put in Corbin Albert. Now, people who have listened to the show before know that I just see Albert at this moment as sort of this understudy role, this backup role, this coming off the bench. If you need fresh legs coming off the bench, she's going to run around. She's going to give a lot of effort at the end of a game. I do not personally think the U.S. is at their strongest if they are starting Corbin Albert in this midfield at the Olympics. And it does call into focus some of the imbalances of the current roster, especially which, as people remember, Katarina Macario had to withdraw due to injury, and they add Lynn Williams to that forward line. They do not replace Macario with a midfielder. That midfield is a little bit thin. They're one injury away from some serious imbalances, if you think about it, right? Sam Coffey, if she's unavailable, Lindsay Horan probably has to play the number 6, or Corbin Albert by herself might have to play the number 6, or they have to go hyper conservative where Horan and Albert try to sort of combine for this defensive midfield role. Rose Lavelle steps out. They don't put in a player like Jaden Shaw, which was interesting to me. Shaw did actually eventually sub in for Albert, which was also interesting to me because I go, oh, so you do think that she can come in as a midfielder. You just didn't think she could start as one. Interesting note, I think, coming into the Olympics. I also think, if they don't think that Crystal Dunn can step into the midfield, if they really truly see her as attacking or defense, whether starting or coming off the bench, that is a thin midfield group. They are a couple just availability issues away from just truly not starting, I think, the group that they think can play the way that they would like to play against top competition. That's a concern. And that was all before the game even started, right? That was all sort of that wide, eyes wide open going like, oh, if Shaw is not considered a starter. Now, I don't know if that's true. It might have just been, Shaw might be quietly dealing with a tiny knock, or it might have been because it was too last minute. They didn't want to throw Shaw in, But the Olympics are going to be quick. They're going to be unexpected. There are going to be roadblocks along the way that Hayes and this group does not expect. And if this is what it looks like when they have to make quick changes, it's a little bit of a concern, and especially in that midfield, which I'm not going to rehash what I said on the video and audio podcast earlier this week, but just sort of all of these same similar issues. We still did not see a huge amount of connectivity, still did not see that fluid play, that possessive play, being able to break lines. They struggled to break Costa Rica's low block. And so it just sort of exacerbated the issues that not only does the U.S. have, but I just don't think they have time to solve. A concern. We'll just say that. We'll say that. So the sudden thinness of the midfield pool, I think, was a very important part of this game. And again, you could say, it wasn't the group that they expected to start. Maybe you have a different starting group. The game goes differently. I think you could say that about like any Olympic game too, right? You never know what's going to happen and you have to be prepared. If Shaw is not your backup number 10, then you don't really have one in terms of a true creative playmaker. That is a concern for the United States, because I said this week, and I think it's true. If the attack does not get going, this is going to be a really tough tournament for the U.S. And the attack both did and did not get going. So Opta, who puts out really, really nice work about the United States, they noted that the U.S. in this game had 26 shots, 12 shots on target, and 67 touches in the box. The most in any match in which they failed to score since Opta, who collects data for the team, began detailed data collection on all U.S. women's national team matches in 2015. So, good and bad, right? Soccer is a tricky sport. The whole team, including Hayes, after this game said, we're getting into the right places. We're making the right connections. We're getting into, spots where we think we can score well. The adjusted XG was a little bit under 2 goals. So as everyone knows, it's sort of tricky to say like 1-to-1, but looking at the way those stats are, the U.S. has to feel like they left at least 2 goals on the table collectively. But that is sometimes where the stats can be deceptive, as people remember from the and not year. I think some of the messaging from this game was very similar to some of those games under Vlatko, where you say, well, we're doing all the right things and we just couldn't punch it through. We were facing a low block and an exceptional performance from Costa Rica's goalkeeper, who made 12 saves on the night. Just wasn't our night. It happens. That's soccer. Sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way. Now, with a new coach, I am actually more inclined to let that ride. I'm okay with that. But I do think that it's super fair for U.S. Women's National Team fans to say, hey, we just did 4 years of this. What's different now? Which leads me to Hayes' comments after the game, which I do not think were bad, but I do think were just sort of interesting in contextualizing the expectations for the team going into this tournament. Because I think people have heard from me before. I think it's like half of one and half of another. The fans are going to want a good showing. The television audience is going to want a good showing. There are going to be people watching this that did not watch the World Cup last year and only maybe just remember, 2019, 2021, that team. There are going to be people who just expect in general American women to do well at the Olympics. And they remember that the U.S. women's national team is one of the best soccer teams in the world. And there are going to be expectations of winning. Nothing Hayes can say or the players can say can change that. Those expectations are going to be there from the general public. But the internal messaging is not that. Okay. So what Hayes says, one of the things I just thought was really interesting is she said she kind of listed off that stat that Opta pulled together, saying again that the touches in the box were high. They were getting into good areas. Their shots on goal were many. They were generating attack if they were not generating goals. And she said, listen, if you play a game of percentages or law of averages, we're creating more and more high quality chances. And we're getting numbers into key areas. We're getting touches in key areas. The last part's the hardest part. And I'm really patient because I've coached teams that have to break blocks down, and it's the hardest thing to do in coaching. Now, she's not wrong. I don't actually disagree with any of that. That's high-level soccer management. It's not going to be good enough, though, if it bounces you out of the Olympics in, the first knockout game, right? And I think people, again, had that feeling from last year to this year of, oh, well, the reason why the U.S. did not advance past Sweden in the round of 16 was not actually because of any defensive issues. It was because they could not score. And then Hayes makes a bold move in the attack, leaving Alex Morgan home. Now, I'm not saying that Alex Morgan would have fixed this game against Costa Rica. I don't think Alex Morgan is the answer alone. I do not actually think that Hayes' decision to leave her off the roster was wrong. But if you are making those kinds of bold choices in the attack, because I even said this earlier this week, the attack is going to be really important to results for the U.S., and then you still fail to punch through, that's going to lead to a lot of different questions. The one other thing that I also just want to note is that Hayes did also say, she thinks the team is doing really well for the fact they're on their fourth game under their permanent manager. Like everything else Hayes has said, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's 100% true. But then you go, well, this is a manufactured situation, right? They spent more than half a year under interim management because they wanted the coach to come in last minute and be able to lead the team for the long term, not just for the short term, right? There was always this question hanging over the Emma Hayes hire of, is this sacrificing the Olympics off of a poor World Cup performance in order to regain the top of the mountain in 2027? As with the US, it's always yes and no. They will never just be focused on process. They will hopefully never again just be focused on winning now at the cost of progressing as a team. But when you do have Hayes saying those sorts of things, right? Saying, it's not been too long under my management. We are still progressing every single game. We're trying to break down the low block. We do not think we're going to play a low block in the Olympics, and I do think that is true. Okay, all fair, but this is a situation that U.S. Soccer created for itself and Hayes knew this was going to happen coming in. So I am always curious kind of how the fans feel about that, right? Where I keep always saying, like, maybe it's okay if you don't get the results so long as you play differently, right? And maybe you saw that a little bit in that game against Mexico, right? Where they faced sort of the same approach that they did earlier this year, and they were more able to problem solve, more able to make nice passes, get in behind, finally get that breakthrough goal. Or maybe it's that you want to see progress and you want to see results, or you want to see those results that you expect from a team of this attacking quality without sort of that dysfunction up top or the inability to take chances, right? I don't know. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what this looks like in the Olympics. We're going to be doing more specific Olympic previewing next week, but ultimately, I think people need to be prepared for this to be really hard. Zambia is going to be really tough. Germany is going to be really tough. Australia is going to be really tough. The defense was not super challenged, certainly not in the game against Costa Rica, but even again in that game against Mexico. So they did not get a good look at what a decisive or cutting midfield is going to look like. So these games did not do that for the defense. There was no kind of defensive exposure other than some of the turnovers in the Mexico game. So that was not really achieved this week. The U.S. faced a more highly transitional team in Mexico and were able to get a goal and get the result that they wanted. They faced a low block in Costa Rica who were very organized, and you could tell, best laid plans. The U.S. is trying to use this to get ready for the Olympics, but Costa Rica is using this to get a result against the United States. They don't have to get drawn out. I think that the U.S. failing to get a goal, sure, a testament to Costa Rica, but again, what are you generating? What are you generating other than sort of exposing that your midfield is not as deep as you thought it was? or that those midfield issues that were kind of grains of a larger winning performance against Mexico now become bigger and bigger in a scoreless draw against Costa Rica. And then how do you learn and how do you grow? And then I think that is how you get into the late game management, which I am just sort of fascinated by late game management in general in the international game, especially with the United States women's national team. That is something that Vlatko Andonovski was criticized for greatly by including myself. He really struggled to know the right trigger moment to send subs out. And I think, again, it's some of the best but worst problems in the world. The U.S. starters are so good. Hayes, as she has said, they haven't had enough time together under her management. They need more time together. They did not need to win this game, but that mentality seeps in, and that's scary. We saw that sometimes with the Vlatko Andonovski years. You think to yourself, well, we don't need to win this game. We just need to implement our philosophies and not get hurt. Okay, you implement the philosophies, you don't get hurt, but you also don't score on those philosophies. What is the progress that's being made? And where is the willingness to send those subs in to make a difference? Now, this also brings in a little bit of Olympic intrigue for me personally, because I would say a week ago, I was very much in the traditional mindset of the starters play, the subs in the 18-player roster plays. The alternates are going to be incredible in training. They're going to watch the games and learn from the experience, but they're probably not going to be that involved. You rarely see alternate switches other than like catastrophic injury, right? That take people out of the entire tournament. There has been a rule change that allows for temporary replacement players, which means that an alternate, for example, let's throw a hypothetical out there that seems less and less crazy by the day. Rose Lavelle has a light knock. That means that she is not out for the rest of the tournament, but she maybe can't play that day. Well, actually, no, it has to do with the amount of hours. She can't play the next day. Let's say that. Emma Hayes has the possibility of replacing Lavelle on that next game day roster with a player like, for example, Croy Bethune. Croy Bethune plays on that game day roster. After that particular game is over, you can switch the original player back on. Now, Bethune, if she did play Olympic minutes, she is an Olympian. She remains in medal contention. If the U.S. did medal, she would get one. But she is, again, back off of the 18-player game day roster that they would have for the rest of the tournament. I did not think this was an implementation that Hayes would consider. She even kind of downplayed it in her own availability. But looking again at some of the thinness in the midfield, looking for those creative choices, or maybe again the reluctance to bring a player like Jaden Shaw on, I wonder if there isn't more of I say the experimentation's over, but if there isn't more of a chance of trying things in the Olympics, because we have to think of this as both a short tournament where the goal is to win, but also Emma Hayes in her 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe 8, 9, 10th game of her career as the head coach of this team. And I am really, really interested in seeing kind of what wins out. But so just sort of to wrap up, not too much on a performance that was a little bit frustrating, sloppy. I don't want to downplay the conditions, but the conditions are not going to be much better in France in the middle of the summer. I still haven't seen, I think everyone can agree, we still have not seen consistent dominance from the new front three of Swanson, Smith, and Rodman, though there have been real nice flashes. I think the midfield is an unsolved problem. And I think the defense has not really been tested. So a lot to consider. No reason to totally freak out. I think these tournaments are funny. I think if anybody has been watching the big men's tournaments this summer, they can appreciate just how strange these tournaments can go. I think in some ways it's almost wild to determine who is good and who is not based on who does the best. But there's going to be many, many different factors that go into these performances. And I think I can speak for myself, and I think I can probably speak for the fans and say that at the very least, we want to try something different, make it look a little bit different than 2023, score some goals. And you can't overly rely on feeling good about your statistical dominance if you do not actually win the game. So thanks everybody for listening. This has been a nice little short catch up on the U.S. Women's National Team. We're going to be doing a lot more of this as we go into Olympic competition. We'll also keeping track of a variety of other Olympic sports throughout the next couple of weeks. It's going to be a very, very fun time. Shout out to my producer extraordinaire, Parker Fenton. Subscribe to the Just Women's Sports YouTube channel, subscribe to our newsletter, and subscribe to the Late Sub anywhere you get your podcasts. We have so much coming up that is very, very exciting. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining.